Welcome to the Food Web Trophic Levels lesson. The objective that we're going to cover today is 8L33, explaining how the flow of energy within food webs is connected to the cycling of matter. And we're actually going to start off with those cycles, and then we'll tie that into the food webs themselves. So, of course, the first question has to be, where does almost all the energy on Earth come from? The energy that we use in the house, the electricity, where's that come from? And if you say, well, the power plant, then of course my next question is, well, where's the power come from there? Okay, so it just depends on the plant. If it's a nuclear power plant, it's coming from nuclear power. If it's a coal fire plant, it's going to come from coal. Well, what is coal? Coal are dead plants and animals. So where do plants and animals get their energy from? And it all comes back to the same thing. All energy, almost all energy on Earth comes from the sun. So that takes us to our first process. It's the carbon dioxide oxygen process. Now, we've already talked about this. We talked about this in a couple of different units. I'm just going to review it really quick because really what we're talking about is what's happening with the energy. So we've talked about it from a lot of different perspectives. We talked about it from the molecules perspective, the properties of matter perspective. The water is made up of 2 hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom. Carbon dioxide is made up of 1 carbon atom, 2 oxygen atoms, and then those things get shuffled around to become the glucose and the oxygen. That's one of the ways we've talked about it. We talked about it from the idea of the creation of sugar, and then the sugar is used for the body to create energy. When we talked about health, so that's another unit where we talked about the same thing. And now we're going to come back to the photosynthesis and the respiration process, and we're going to talk about the energy aspect of it. So when the plant takes into the chloroplast is the green, when you see a green when you look at a plant, that's the chloroplast, the color of the chloroplast. Inside of the chloroplast is the chlorophyll. The chlorophyll is what captures sunlight. So you got the water coming in through the roots, you got carbon dioxide coming in through the stomata on the leaves. Sunlight comes through the leaf, gets in the chlorophyll, and the chlorophyll traps the sunlight. And it takes that sunlight and it breaks apart the water molecule and it breaks apart the carbon dioxide molecule, and it uses the sunlight to stick those back together in a different order to create the glucose molecule, which is sugar, the basic form of sugar, and oxygen. Oxygen is a byproduct. Photosynthesis process is not a process that produces oxygen primarily. It produces food primarily. Oxygen is just one of those good side effects we get from it. So when you get that glucose molecule, you're getting sunlight that's been stored. We've taken radiant energy from the sun, and we've turned it into chemical energy, stored chemical energy. Well, that takes us to respiration, which is just the reverse process of photosynthesis, where photosynthesis happens in plants, respiration happens inside every cell. Human cells, animal cells, plant cells, doesn't matter if it's a cell, respiration's happening there. Inside the cells, respiration takes that glucose molecule that has that energy stored and the oxygen, and it burns the oxygen, which then breaks apart the glucose and releases that energy for the body to use. Well, when it's done, it puts all the pieces back together, and what it's left with is water and carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide you breathe out, the water you go to the bathroom to get rid of. Or you breathe that out too, because just a small portion of that water comes out in water vapor in your breath with the carbon dioxide. So we've got this process, that storing of energy, the sun's energy, the breaking up of the glucose to get the energy out of the food, and then our bodies use that food. So that's the process of carbon dioxide and oxygen. Well, how does that connect to food webs and food chains and the ecosystem and all of that? Well, the energy we're talking about is the energy that's happening in this process, okay? So if you take an apple and you eat an apple, you take that food and it goes down in your stomach and it breaks apart, and then that food, that glucose is broken down and taken to your cells break it down to get the energy out to use it. Now, this is where the connection comes. We have to talk just a minute about the parts of the food chain. You guys already know this. This is stuff that you learned, if not in 6th grade, before that. So, you know, what's a producer, what's a consumer, what's a decomposer? So, producer is plants, usually. Consumer are things that eat plants or plants and animals. Decomposers are things that break down dead stuff. Okay, this is familiar information for you. You should already know this. But maybe you don't know the vocabulary that goes with it. So let's talk vocabulary for a second. It's called a trophic level. Trophic level. So each of these three, producers, consumers, decomposers, represent trophic levels. Okay? Now, the point of this is to help you understand the different trophic levels. So you're like, well, I already know what a producer is. I already know what a consumer is. That's good, but do you understand it based off, if I were to say the second trophic level of that food chain, would you know which animal I was talking about? Okay, so that's what this is going to be, is a taking the information you already have and adjusting it, molding it so that it fits the new information. Okay, so the first one here is trophic levels. You have the first trophic level. That's the bottom level of the food pyramid, or of the food chain, food web. Okay, the first trophic level are the producers. What's a producer? Well, a producer is an autotroph. Autotroph just meaning it's an organism that makes its own food. Could be a plant, could be phytoplankton, could be chemosynthetic bacteria that live on the cold seeps and live in the hydrothermal vents in the bottom of the ocean. These are the ones that do photosynthesis and chemosynthesis and to produce the glucose and oxygen in the process. Okay, so some of these examples would be trees, grass, the chemosynthetic bacteria, phytoplankton, just to name a few. You can go on and on and on and on here. You could add the different, you could be very specific. Pine tree, maple tree, Japanese maple tree. You could talk about flowers, and you could go into anything that's a plant could be listed here as an example. This is the first trophic level. The consumers, however, where it gets a little crazy is, if we come back here 2 spots, you guys know producer, consumer, decomposer. Producer is the first trophic level. We just talked about that. What is a little funky is the fact that consumers have multiple levels. Okay? So the second trophic level, so the first trophic level are plants. They make their own food. Second trophic level are primary consumers. Primary consumers. Well, what does that mean? Okay? Well, first of all, it's a heterotroph. It means it can't make its own food. They have to get their food from somebody else. But a primary consumer, a second level trophic organism, are herbivores. They only eat plants. So your first level are plants. Second level are your herbivores. Second trophic level. So an example of that would be grasshoppers, rabbits, squirrels, zooplankton in the ocean. Okay, so consumers have multiple levels. This first level, primary consumer, is the second trophic level. The next trophic level inside of consumer is the third trophic level. Now, we're going to say and subsequent trophic levels. All that word means is if we have more trophic levels after the third. So a subsequent level would be the fourth trophic level or the fifth trophic level. You're not going to get too many more than that, and we'll talk about why in a few minutes. But the idea is this. You always have a first level. You always have a first level is plants. First trophic level is plants. The second trophic level is your herbivores, things that are only eating plants. Your third trophic level is made up of omnivores. If you remember flipping back here, omnivores are animals that can eat plants or animals. That would be bears. Human beings are omnivores. Pigs are omnivores. Okay. Or a carnivore, something that only eats animals. Wolves, sharks, that type of thing. So you got your third level and sometimes your fourth level, and we'll talk about that fourth level in a minute. So you got your first level plants, your second level are herbivores, your third level are omnivores and carnivores. Okay, so let's do a quick summary I want to show you a picture of what this looks like. Okay, so your first trophic level, those are your producers, those are your plants, your trees, your flowers, your algae, your phytoplankton. Okay, you got the point there. Okay, now the second level are your primary consumers. That would be your vegetarians, your rabbits, your squirrels, your grasshoppers, that type of thing. You'll notice that the words are smaller. That's on purpose, because the idea is there are more first trophic level organisms than there are second trophic level organisms. So you got more animals down here at the bottom than you do have here in the middle. And you'll notice the third trophic level, the secondary consumers, that's your omnivores, pigs, human beings, and your carnivores, lions, tigers, and sharks. Oh my. You notice I didn't say bears, because bears are omnivores. They eat both plants and animals. But it's also smaller because the number of animals that are at that third trophic level are less than the number of animals that are at second trophic level. So what does this mean if we start breaking this down for energy information, which is where we started with this? Let's talk about the energy levels. So basically, the higher up you go in the trophic levels, the more energy you need. Okay? The amount of energy that you need as a person every day is a whole lot higher than a little rabbit needs every day. Okay? You're at level 3. The rabbit's at level 2. So the higher up you go, the more energy you need. Well, the problem is, the higher up you go, the less energy there is. You're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Well, let me break this down for you. So you've got grass, and it does photosynthesis. It gets energy from the sun. It stores that energy. Okay? Now, let's say a rabbit comes by and eats that grass. Of that 100% of that energy, 100% of that energy in the grass, 90% of that energy is given off as heat or is lost. Only 10% of that energy the rabbit actually can use. Well, if you're only getting 10% of the energy in each thing that you eat, you're going to have to eat a lot. Remember, you need more energy than the plant does if you're the rabbit. And we need more energy than the rabbit does. And if we're only getting 10%, we're going to have to eat a whole lot more of it to get the energy that we need. So there's got to be more producers for the rabbits so that the rabbits don't run out of food. Just like for us, cows and pigs, if you're not a vegetarian, there have to be more of them than there are of us, because we're going to have to eat more to get the same amount of energy. So when we go from second trophic level, primary consumers, to secondary consumers at the third trophic level, we only get 10% of the energy from that previous level. So we need more energy. There's less energy available, and we're only getting 10%. So what you discover is, if you go out and you actually map this, which you're going to be doing today, the trophic level, first trophic level, the producers, first trophic level, are going to have the most organisms. And then the second trophic level, the primary consumers, are going to have less organisms than the first level does. And then the third trophic level are going to have even less organisms than the second trophic level and the first trophic level. So as the energy is needed goes up, the amount of energy available goes down, and then the number of organisms as you go up goes down. Okay? So I'm going to throw up a picture here, and this is kind of what I want you to do for the assignment for today. Okay? So this is my example of the assignment. Okay? 3 things that you have to do before you start. Number 1, you have to pick a biome. Okay, and the biome ecosystem habitat thing, if you don't get this, it means you didn't watch the video from Monday. So you need to go back and watch Mondays or Tuesdays. I don't remember which day it is. Earlier this week, you have to watch that video because I go into all of that on that video. So biome, you're going to pick a biome. Remember, there's only 5 biomes. So you're going to pick a biome. I picked grassland. And I did mine easy. You can't use mine. So if you turn mine in, I don't give you credit. Just understand. So I picked biome. The ecosystem is the North Carolina Piedmont. Okay, and the habitat is my backyard. Okay, I have grass in my backyard. I have a pine tree in my backyard. There's algae on the wood in my backyard. There's an oak tree in my backyard. There's lots of rose bushes, and we have pumpkin plants that we planted back in the spring that are starting to come up. So these are all my trophic level 1 organisms. So you see the TL down there in the right corner. That's trophic level 1. Okay, now if you follow the arrows, and it's a little confusing, that's why I color-coded it. Let's look at the grasshopper. Where does the grasshopper get its food? From the grass, the algae, the rose bush, and the pumpkin plant. Okay, so that makes the grasshopper a trophic level 2 organism. The rabbit gets its food from the grass and the pumpkin plant. The squirrel gets its food from the pine tree, the oak tree, and the pumpkin plant. Okay, now I'm gonna spur off here for just a second. If you look just at those 3, so if I were able to cover up that top part there past trophic level 2, and we could just look at trophic level 1 and 2, if I were to destroy all the pumpkin plants in my backyard, which animal would be most affected by that loss? Okay, grasshopper has 4 things to eat, squirrel has 3 things to eat, rabbit only has 2 things to eat. So if I lose all of my pumpkin plants, my rabbits are going to run into problems because there's not enough food. Okay, so that's always important to be mindful of. What effects will the loss of one thing have on this food web? And if we lose rabbits, what else gets affected? Well, the cat will be affected because cats eat rabbit. Eagles will be affected. Snakes will be affected. And then cats and snakes will be affected most because if we lose rabbits because we lost pumpkin plants, then snakes and cats both lose one of their 2 ways to eat. Which means that if we lose rabbits because the pumpkin plants are gone, now the cat can only look at the robin for meals, which means the robin numbers are going to go down. You see how the loss of one thing, even though there's a lot going on, the loss of one thing can affect more than one animal, one organism. So we've got our grasshopper, our rabbit, and our squirrel, which are trophic level 2. Now, I put in trophic level 3 and 4 here because, and this is why, I put in the robin. Well, the robin is not, it doesn't eat. It's not a primary, it's not a trophic level 2 organism. It doesn't eat the trees and the grass, the algae, the pumpkin plants. It only eats bugs and berries. Well, it might get something from the pumpkin plant once the pumpkins ripen and they can get the seeds out of it. But really, most of the robin's going to get is the grasshopper. So then we get to the eagle, which is trophic level 3 because it's eating the squirrel and the rabbit and the snake. The snake is also trophic level 3, even though it's getting eaten by something above it. It's still a trophic level 3 organism. It's still an herbivore omnivore or a carnivore. In this case, it would be a carnivore because it eats rabbit and squirrel. The cat, we could say, is a trophic level 4, or we could also say it's trophic level 3 because it also eats, it doesn't eat, it's not a 2 because it doesn't eat any of the green down here. So it has to be at least a 3. So it's either a 3, and we can add a 4th level if you feel like it makes sense. So this is the example of what your trophic level diagram needs to look like. You'll notice trophic level 1, I have 6 organisms. Trophic level 2, I have 3 organisms. And trophic level 3 and 4, I have 4 organisms. Now you're like, well, you have more above than you do in the middle. Yes, but the robin is the key because the robin also eats from trophic level 1. So it could technically be in the 2-3 range. Okay, depending on what it's eating. If it's eating the pumpkin plants, it's a 2. If it's eating the grasshopper, it's a 3. So remember, trophic level 3 is omnivore or carnivore. So not just eating other eating other animals, but eating plants and animals. So the important piece here is as we move up, there's less energy. So the problem we run into here is we better have a lot of squirrels, we better have a lot of rabbits, because we got eagles, snakes, and cats eating off of the rabbits and the squirrels. Okay? So what I would like you to do is to pick a biome. Remember, there's 5 biomes. You've got grasslands, you got forests, you got aquatic, you've got tundra, and desert. Those are your 5 biomes. Ecosystem is more specific. So if you pick a desert, then you need to, if you pick a desert biome, then you need to choose a specific desert ecosystem. So the Southwest Desert in the United States, the Sahara Desert in Africa, the Atacama Desert in South America. Okay? And then habitat, you're going to zoom in on one piece of that ecosystem. So if we're talking about the Southwest Desert in the United States as your ecosystem, the habitat could be the part of the desert that's in Arizona. Okay? So just take your biome, your ecosystem, and your habitat, narrow it down till you have a spot, and then build a trophic level food web for that habitat. Okay? Now, I'm not going to give you a specific number on the levels. What you do need to remember is your trophic levels need to be based off of this lesson. So your trophic level 1 should have the most organisms, trophic level 2 should have fewer organisms than 1, and trophic level 3 should have fewer organisms than 2. Okay? Which is part of the reason why I put cat as trophic level 4. Okay? So I hope that helps. If you have any problems, please come see me on Microsoft Teams. Do not forget, all work is due at midnight on June 4th, which is today if you're watching the video when it was posted. Have a great day and have a great summer.